Hello and welcome. This is Reanimated. It's episode 200 and something, guys. I mean, honestly, who can keep track at this point? We are prolific, to say the least. Or maybe just persistent. One or the other.
Dogged.
Yes, that would be accurate too. Hey, this is a podcast about zombie stuff, guys. We talk about zombie news. We talk about, I don't know, general apocalypse related things. Like today, we're going to talk about a disease. And media, if you've never heard us before. Today we're continuing our review of season 9 of The Walking Dead with episodes 3 and 4, which if I didn't know better, I'd feel like we were already getting close to a mid-season finale.
Yeah, no kidding.
Right?
Yeah.
So let's get into the news though, HA. We found a couple of cool little trailers for some interesting projects out there, and then there's some also terrifying news out of Asia. So launch whichever you want to talk about.
All right, let's go with the I don't know. Let's go with the more disturbing news first, and then lighten it up with some of the others.
Yeah.
But I noted this, and I almost texted it to you, Stuart, but I just was like kind of traumatized by it, and I figured we would talk about it today, and I figured you had seen it as well. But basically, there were 2 cases of pneumatic plague that were diagnosed and treated in Beijing. And there's some scary things about this. One is that plague is terrifying. We all know about the Black Death, or at least I would hope everybody who listens to this podcast would know about it. But there are 3 different varieties of plague, and this is one of the more catchy ones because it is basically spread through coughing and things like that, and it's also one of the most difficult to treat because it is so devastating to your system. And there were a few things about this article that I found scary. One is that, first of all, Beijing, massive population center, and it is notorious, like, the Chinese are notoriously tight-lipped about stuff like this that happens. So the fact that we now know about 2 cases worries me that there may be quite a few more, but that they're not talking about, and maybe they just couldn't keep this particular news lid down tight, sort of like buttoned down. But the other part is that, we've talked about this a few times, but there are limited resources in terms of fighting plague, and this kind specifically, because it has become antibiotic resistant. So this is just cheery news and freaks me out slightly. And granted, I mean, look, we've had a couple of plague diagnoses. I mean, out in Denver, there was the whole prairie dog issue. There was like a group of prairie dogs apparently out near Denver that have plague, and some people got it and were treated. Took them a minute to figure out that that's what they had because, hey, plague. But
prairie dogs is interesting because this article also talks about marmots. Some people ate a raw marmot kidney, which I have questions.
Many questions.
And then got the bubonic plague in May. So, but not the same as this, but plague's all around us, guys. That's one of the cheerful messages coming from Reanimated.
Correct. So anyway, don't watch out for those prairie dogs and any sort of signs that you might have this plague. Stay safe, everybody.
What are some of the symptoms of having this? Do we know what the symptoms are other than just death?
Well, this particular varietal basically reads as like the normal, like almost like a real, like I would say probably like a bad flu, but then
like so Captain Trips.
Kind of, yep. And it's like very, very contagious because it's lung-based. But it ends up with like, I don't want to be nasty, but it's just nasty. It's like bloody sputum, and like that's what it eventually progresses into, and it just kind of shuts down it's like super intense, like flu, I guess, / pneumonia, and it is really not great.
Okay.
It just does. It's probably not a fun thing to have. But
Okay.
you could also see that. I mean, look, this is something that, if you see somebody with fever, chills, vomiting, and nausea, you're not necessarily immediately going to be like, hey, that's plague, right?
No.
So, and which is probably why it took them a bit, just a tick to figure out that that's what it was. They were trying to control panic around the disease, like when this was like under the social platform that they allow in China. But they scrubbed, I don't know if you read this whole article, but the Chinese censors scrubbed the hashtag Beijing confirms it's treating plague cases, which is why I said, and everybody wants to know exactly how these people got it. They're not saying how. They're not saying where they were from. They're not, you know what I mean? Like, it's a little
not a good hashtag to begin with.
Well,
I mean, that's as hashtags go,
but
it's a little bulky.
I guess my point is that the fact that this even got out is a little, like, it always makes me worry that there's a lot more.
It could be way worse than we know.
So anyway, stay healthy.
Cheerful.
Stay healthy, reanimated people. But as promised, we will jump on to more happy subjects, such as...
Well, first, before I can go there, AJ, I have personal plague news to report.
Oh, no. Do you have the plague?
No. We have... Well, it's more of a viral report, I guess. We have norovirus in my house.
Oh, no. Did you get it, too?
So, no, not yet. I mean, so it's just a matter of time because it's on, like, every surface. It lasts for weeks. You never know. What do you
pretty much have to, like, just...
I have to put on gloves made of those antibacterial wipes, like, and, like, put those inside my mouth, probably.
Can't
is the only way to get through this.
You can get a norovirus vaccine now.
Oh, really? Well,
Yep.
It might be too late. So my daughter got it a week ago, like last weekend. She came down with it, and it was many hours of protracted badness. And then my son just got it yesterday. So it was a week later.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, that's the problem. And that's also generally what happens on cruise ships. It's because it's so long lasting and you can't really do a ton.
Stay.
And
It'll
guess
just
what?
Stay on a surface.
And guess what? Those little those gels or the antibacterial stuff doesn't do anything because alcohol doesn't kill it. Only bleach does.
Mother of God.
I know. So maybe you just do a little bleach bath in your entire abode.
Perfect. Just pour it in my eyes.
I'm sorry. But you are what I would call a dead man walking.
I don't doubt it. It just sucks. I thought we were free, and then more puke yesterday.
Ooh.
Anyway, so we found a couple of trailers. Or let's talk about George Romero first. I don't know why this news only breaks years after he dies, or a year plus after he dies, but he was apparently not in the running, but he was hired to direct the Resident Evil movie, the original one.
It doesn't shock me. It also doesn't shock me that he detached himself he was detached from the project.
Detached, yeah.
He is sort of an alpha in terms of the projects that he would be involved in. He needed to have full creative control, and this isn't his franchise. So
it's so commercial. It doesn't feel like something he would agree to do.
Yeah, and maybe I just don't see that happening in a good way. He was very critical. I mean, look, he really hated the fast zombies, so this sort of surprised me that he agreed as well.
Well, there weren't fast zombies in the original game, and I think that's based on this article. He had like his assistant play the game a few times and take notes, and based on their notes, that's how he came up with his script. And the reason he was fired, I mean, different people involved in the production have given different reasons, but the reason that this article attributes is that his script was going to be X-rated. Like, it was so violent. And after multiple rewrites, he wasn't compromising enough, and so he got fired.
Well, I could see that, but I also think he probably got fired because he was very difficult to work with. And
he was a guy who likes to run the show. And that's the thing. You never saw him in or at least we never saw him in a what's the word? Like a second tier position. He was always the boss.
Correct.
He had to answer to his investors, but he was not going to take creative notes.
I mean, he's the antithesis of that kind of director. So anyway, not shocking, but interesting. Yeah. And then the other two interesting trailers you found, but one was a Belgian zombie film called Yummy, and that's
coming. It's going to be like a comedy with boobs based on the trailer, lots of boobs.
Yeah, it's definitely going back to those. I mean, I think George Romero would probably approve of it based upon the number of boobs that they're showing. And the hijinks of a zombie apocalypse and I guess a plastic surgery clinic. But in any case, the effects look pretty good, and that's coming out mid-December of this year. And then the second one, also European, perhaps. It looks like it takes place in Amsterdam, called Zomboat.
Oh, I think it's British.
Is it British? Okay.
It's made by ITV. Yeah, so when I first saw this, I was like, oh, is this like a spiritual successor to Dead Set, because there were some boat,
Yeah.
some canal scenes in that show. But this was a collaboration between ITV and Hulu, so this is on Hulu. I don't know how it's been there for a month.
And I never got a trailer for it, which is interesting because typically it's throwing every single trailer like this in front of me.
Yeah.
I have seen nothing. So Hulu, your algorithms are off, my friends. But it looks kind of fun.
They don't know about Reanimated. They don't know what's up.
Yeah, but they know my viewing habits.
I know.
Granted, sometimes they get slightly skewed because of Bill's viewing habits. They just don't know what to do with our two clashing tastes. But
I will get zombie stuff thrown at me, and then something geared towards 3-year-olds. So don't worry, your algorithm is way better off than mine. Mine is very confused.
But in any case, I mean, I think these are both up for we should check them out, and we'll review them once we're done with our grand walk through season 9 of The Walking Dead. Are you ready to jump into the next couple episodes?
Absolutely. This was quite the time. So this first one is called Warning Signs, and it is a heck of an episode. I'm gonna just lead with saying this was a heck of an episode.
Yeah.
This was directed by Dan Liu and written by Corey Reed, and audience is in the 5 millions. I feel like the show is, it's definitely down from its peak, but we need to do an analysis of audience numbers throughout the season, because I have a gut feeling that the audience increased over the course of this season.
I think so too. One thing that I would say that I wish they had played out slightly more, and you figure out the mystery. Come on, why not combine a murder mystery with the zombie apocalypse? This is great. It's got murder.
Kind of do.
They kind of do.
Rick basically becomes Hercule Poirot in this episode.
I know. So in any case, I think where we left off was the quote unquote cliffhanger of the last episode. So Justin is dead, and we see him. I thought that was kind of a cool reveal at the beginning of this episode, where we see the walkers eating somebody, and then that person reanimates, and we discover that's Justin, and it's very clear that he's been killed not by walkers but by somebody. There's like a puncture / it looks like an arrow wound, honestly, or something like that, not necessarily like the walkers got him. So
yes, not at all. And we had seen him get absconded off the road at the end of the last episode. Yep. So it's pretty clear he's been hard done by. I thought this was cool. Like, this cold open was cool too, because they show the zombies actively eating him, and then suddenly they all stop and break off, and then you start to see his feet move, and he gets up. I don't know if we've been treated to that version of a reanimation.
We haven't, and it's kind of interesting because there's enough of him left that he can get up and walk.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting, and the reveal was good, I thought. I would say Justin, or the actor that plays Justin, zombie walking needs a little work, but other than that, it was pretty good.
Hey, he plays a brash, swaggadocio. I don't know. He plays a douche. He doesn't play a zombie.
True. So anyway, this is revealed, and of course, or people find him. We're already seeing some tension. We see it with Maggie and fake Glenn bringing
Whoa. That's Cal. He is a well-established character on this show.
I'm teasing.
He's one of those Hilltop guys whose name
is.
I absolutely could not remember.
Never remember Cal, but anyway, he and I was glad to see him based upon our last conversation, because he is somebody that's been steady at Hilltop. So okay. So he's with Maggie. They're bringing the food to as they're part of the deal, even though they haven't received the fuel. They get waylaid.
This speaks to their confidence in the safety of their regime.
Yep.
That they're like, yeah, we'll take a wagon of just food with just me and Cal. I mean, Cal is one of her heavies, one of her wall guards, but that's not much of a convoy. Like, they're not worried about a herd. They're not worried about much.
Yeah, and that seems a little weird because we've seen a lot of herd activity and things like that. I feel like there is enough confidence because most everybody has been working on the bridge. There is some combination of the communities, so that doesn't surprise me. However, there is definitely a threat when the group of former saviors walk through. We've got Jed as the ringleader. There's definitely threats, but there is dissension in the crowd because I don't.
Laura.
What is the Laura is basically the voice of reason amongst the saviors.
She's also the voice of "Please don't kick me out of this new community."
Yeah, she's like,
I really want to
don't
stay.
want to like deal with the what the world was before, and so they are walking along and discover, they figure out that Justin, they had been looking for him, and then Maggie and Cal get rid of them, and then there's like a big herd that comes up, and Justin is discovered, and so there is, clearly some strife because it's clear that he has been killed in a way that was not just by Walker. Somebody clearly killed him. And the sort of tenuous peace that's there, the truce that's there, starts to unravel.
Yeah, and you've got other saviors like DJ, who, I mean, later this season is like one of the good guys.
Yeah.
He's like one of the ringleaders of saying like we want guns. We're done with this. This isn't working, and it gets very close, and this interrupts a delightful family fun day montage with Rick and Michonne.
Yeah. I mean, they have a family fun day with Judith. You see a little bit of what their life is, and then they are making a decision to, I think, start a family, which is sort of clear. And
oh yeah,
that's there. And I think so part of me, I mean, I'd like to see how some of this stuff plays out, but part of me thinks that all these tensions would have been coming to light a little bit before this. It feels like, look, the saviors threw in their lot with Negan. They are now they are somewhat dependent on these other communities. I'm sure some of them don't like it. I don't know, like part of me feels like just the way this is playing out and the way some of these characters like Jed and others are being so vocal in a super negative way, like they very much don't want to play along with the community. I feel like this would have all happened a lot earlier and you're not even going to get their cooperation to do such a thing like the Bridge Project.
I go back to that argument. I mean, I agree with you that yes, things have suddenly gotten really bad, right? But I would go back to this argument that things were okay when they still could grow their own crops and they were their own semi-autonomous community. And since they've lost that and now they're like, now we're just like indentured servants.
Yeah.
Like things have gone bad for them and maybe they feel like things are even worse. But not everybody feels that way. It's just, It's down to the couple of loudmouth douches. And Jed, unfortunately, really models himself on Negan. Mm-hmm. And that is evidenced in this episode by his name-calling thing that he does. He calls Maggie the widow. He calls Anne garbage lady. He calls Carol boss lady.
Yep.
It's extremely infantile, but it's effective, right? It's just like that same bullying thing that Negan used to do.
Yeah, no, it's true that he's doing this. He's definitely a voice of some of the frustrations. And look, I also get it because the group of saviors are not allowed weapons and they now have evidence that, one of their own has been targeted and taken out. And this was one of their more vocal douches. So it's sort of like, I kind of get where they're coming from too. But it was also interesting just to watch the dynamics play out, who voiced what in terms of talking them down. We had Rick literally driving in on a horse, which, I guess, it's like, okay, can we do the metaphor of a knight much more clearly than this? Or the law, I guess. And that we've had lots of visuals of Rick. I mean, the main visual of the comic initially in the first issue is with him on that horse going into Atlanta. And this is, I feel like, another callback to that in a different way, but and as the law, like he is the embodiment of the law, and
he actually talked about his law enforcement background in the last episode when he was telling Justin that he was a piece of dirt, right? He was like, I've known guys like you my whole career. Mm-hmm. He doesn't actually talk that way, but yeah. So they part of his like way he breaks this up is he's like, break into teams, and so everybody pairs up and goes and searches a grid, and this is where we get our first big clue of who the who the baddies are in this. Well, I mean, I guess that's relative, but who the people are who are killing saviors.
Yep.
Because we follow Cindy from Oceanside and Maggie, who've been teamed up, and Cindy drops this clue right before an action sequence, so you could miss it, where she's like, "Oh, there's a house over here. We used to live here before, Oceanside."
Yeah.
I don't know if you picked up on that in the original HA. I feel like you often do pick up on these kinds of clues.
I felt like something was up, and I also felt like something was up in pairing her with Maggie because we haven't seen a ton of her. And so I felt like they're trying to highlight something. So I kind of thought this might be what was going on.
She's also had this wound on her hand that Enid, I feel like, was patching up a couple episodes ago. She's like, "Oh, I forget what she said she was doing, like tying her shoe or something. What a dumb way to cut your hand." Mm-hmm. But like, there's a couple of clues here now that there's something going on with these Oceansiders, right? Or not really. Or it's just an innocent, she cut her hand and this is where they used to live, and so she knows about this house. And then there's this action sequence where she and Maggie have to take care of a lot of zombies, and then Rick and a bunch of other people ride up. And then they're like, "Hey, wait a second, where's Arat's team?"
And we find B had been knocked out, Arat's gone. And then we're also seeing Rick's, his little Poirot sort of technique as he's, and not just him, but like,
calling him Poirot is actually super generous because all he really does is go, "Did you do it?"
Yeah, pretty much
along those lines
with his little gravelly voice. But we've not just got him doing that; we've got Gabriel doing that with Anne. And it's interesting because they choose this. So obviously, Gabriel and Anne have been knocking boots, and so it's a bit. The fact that he even has to ask, he's already lied for her because Rick was asking him if Anne was with him.
You notice she doesn't actually answer his question.
Nope.
He's like, "Did you see something?" And she's like, "Do you think I'm hiding something?"
Yeah, I know. She answers the question with a question. But even Rick, Rick's questioning Daryl. And we know that it can't be the obvious people here because they've tried to point to that, given that the Justin's been taken out by what looks like an arrow or a bolt. And so we know that it can't be that easy.
The fact that Daryl gets a little bit miffed that Rick is asking him when Daryl has been like, "These people are garbage and I hate them."
Yeah, I know. It's kind of funny, but not shocking. And so, it's interesting because it is basically pitting people against people that they've really trusted and cared about. And so, but the other part of it is that, look, Rick's got to keep peace within the community to get this project keeping going. Gabriel's got to resolve something with Anne to make sure that there's trust in their relationship. Though I would say, when somebody starts talking, like when you sort of walk up on somebody, which is what happens with Gabriel and Anne, you walk up on somebody who's doing something nefarious. She goes back to her little junk area, pulls out a walkie-talkie, puts batteries in it.
Perfectly functional, charged up walkie.
Yep, starts talking to people about A's and B's, and it's definitely nefarious. And Gabriel finds out about this, and you know what? I just have to say, pro tip, Gabriel, when you walk in and discover somebody's nefarious plan, and you decide maybe not to go along with it, maybe don't reveal immediately that you're going to tell Rick. Just saying. Yeah.
He's a priest. I mean, what's he gonna do?
I know, but man,
this is the most naive we've seen him in a while. That's for sure.
Yeah, and it's of course she's gonna knock you out, dude. And that was oh, Gabriel. And she's talking about A's and B's, and that it becomes somewhat clear what that means.
Not to me. I mean, she's like, "And all this time, I thought you were a B,"
right.
And I don't know if that means that he's an A, or I guess so. But she knocks out A's, is apparently what she does. Mm. And then the next episode, we get to see more of what being an A means. I don't know.
Yeah.
Still weird.
But the upshot of it is that she's in communication with potentially another community. There is a payment, which is apparently an A. And that apparently means she's human trafficking, or that's what Gabriel has surmised. And, there's a weird little scene with a walker where she almost, has a walker bite him or something.
I think that's in the next episode, yeah.
Oh, sorry, it's the next one. But still, it's not fun.
It's all very strange. And this is the thing. I don't know if he's not a B and he's a 0 or a C, because in what scenario is having an infected or a bitten person
A good thing.
Useful. Maybe they have a lab and they're still doing research, but I feel like how hard is it to find a bitten person in this environment?
And in this,
however,
and
that's kind of like really towards the end, and we've got other scenes going on here, like Daryl.
Oh yeah.
Finding a corpse with a harpoon in it, a zombie, I think, or maybe a person, and he's like, "I know who did it," and then
and
him and Maggie go off to find whoever did it.
Yeah, and it's clearly Oceanside people if you have been keeping track. And they come upon the Oceanside folks who
going back to that scene where B is like apparently knocked out in the woods.
Yeah,
this is them trying to cover their tracks. Clearly, why do you think she was really knocked out, or she was just lying there pretending to be?
I think she was pretending to be, and like all of her weapons
it's not
are
safe
still
to get knocked out in the woods.
No, so that's why I think she was. That's why I think she was pretending. But they have all the weapons there, so that's also mysterious. And Arat's gone. You know, and there's a lot of pairing. I mean, Daryl and Maggie are paired together, and they're the ones that come upon the Oceanside folks with Arat. And, you know, I think it's, you know, they are basically taking out some of the saviors because these are the ones that killed the Oceanside men way back. And the whole thing is that they say is that, look, we wouldn't have been empowered to do this until Maggie killed Gregory. I find this to be a somewhat weak argument. But, and then suddenly this all gets into the whole Negan issue, whether Rick had the decision to keep Negan alive or not. And, you know, the difference, I think, and I mean, look, I think that Maggie's decision with Gregory was weird, only because, look, she got, I think it was definitely fueled by the fact that her kid was in danger. She was constantly dealing with his dissension, but slightly different than what's going on with the Oceanside folks. And I'm not in any way saying that people wouldn't be upset and that there wouldn't be tensions because of the issue with the men. But again, I feel like all this stuff had to have been talked about before when the communities are trying to coordinate and work together. Because of course this is going to be a source of tension.
And the thing with them saying, you know, now we know that there's another law other than Rick's.
Yeah.
It's like Rick would never. I mean, he was just preventing people from lynching Negan. Right. We've never seen anybody this season come to him and say, "All right, we want to have a retrial. We want to kill Negan," and him like
say no,
rule with an iron fist and be like, "Get out of here! I'm going to hurt you if you try to kill him or something." You know, but like that's this weird disconnect to me. Is it's like, oh wait, so was it really that difficult to talk to Rick about this?
Right.
Instead you have to do all this cloak and dagger stuff, like knocking B out in the forest or having her lie down and wait for somebody to come find her, which must have also been super boring. And then in the next episode, there's more of this like deception going on that makes it completely not apples for apples when you're talking about Rick's way versus everybody else's way.
And you know, look, Maggie, when hearing how Arat was involved in killing the men, she basically says, "All right, go for it." Like she can't judge them.
It was the story of the 11-year-old boy, and honestly, I'd be hard pressed not to greenlight that too. But and that's the thing. They even come with the argument. They're like, "Oh, Arat's the last one," and Maggie is the one with the argument. Like, no, it's not. It's not going to end here.
Right.
So she's signing on
to a long.
She's signing off on destruction of the community.
Correct, and I think that's weird.
It's definitely weird, but it's we've also had another scene of Carol and Rick going out and doing more searching under cover of darkness. Mm-hmm. Carol gets lured in by Jed pretending to be a zombie, which I think was pretty cool.
Yep.
On his part, Jed finally has a good idea, except his idea is also like, I'm going to take Carol prisoner, because this never works, guys.
Carol should never be. I mean, you're not going to win against Carol.
Rick is there too as her backup. So like this dream team, I'm sorry, Jed and DJ, you had no chance.
Nope. And so, you know, they're basically like, we're going to walk off because like you guys won't give us weapons and whatever. Carol basically escapes with giving Jed a flesh wound. And so that's sort of like, okay, then they're going to run off and not help out anymore. And that is, you know, probably for the best, except that they just start kind of roving around in the woods. So, I don't know. I would probably do something to limit the gathering of people doing this. And sorry, but the saviors, I don't know. You gotta, like, I don't think you can just let them roam free. Sorry.
When they just let him walk away at the end of
Yep.
the episode.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
This is part of Rick's model. It was like, all right, you guys are free now, but things are going to be different. Well, they're different,
yeah.
but they're kind of going back to the way they were. And Rick can't. What can he offer them? He doesn't have food to offer them because Maggie has all the food. Although they just brought a giant wagon full of food there the day before.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of the end of the episode. It's bad news. Also, Maggie and Daryl have a conversation on the road where Maggie's like, she says that I opened their eyes, but they opened mine. It's time to go see Negan.
Yep.
And we've given Rick's way a chance, and now it's bad.
And if any of this sounds familiar to you, I mean, look, you've got Daryl and Maggie now being like, and it's them against Rick, or them against what Rick's philosophies are. Gee, this sounds familiar. And there will be something else familiar that happens in this next episode. So,
The Obliged.
Yeah.
Directed by Rosemary Rodriguez and written by Geraldine Inoa. And this came out right before Halloween 2018. And a slight uptick in audience.
Yep. We got, a bunch of stuff with Michonne kind of trying to be what she's being. She's like waking up. She's doing the sort of domesticated life thing, but she's still stressed out. And we know this because she goes out every night to kill zombies.
Yeah, well, she's really having a hard time coming up with the laws, right? She and Rick have had conversations about it. It's been kind of on her mind a lot. She's trying to write a constitution, which it's really hard to write a short one of these, right? Like the constitution for the EU, the European Union, is like 500 pages versus the one here in the U.S.
Right.
It's really hard to write a short constitution unless you're living in the 18th century.
Right. So we definitely know she's restless, but, and it's sort of torn because she does love basically being a mom to Judith and doing these things, but she needs to get her zombie on. She needs to be a bit of a warrior as well. So we've got that while Rick's off trying to sort of salvage the bridge project, which it seems like it's not going to happen. Jesus is talking to Maggie. And
she goes back to Hilltop just to get some supplies, which apparently, and Jesus calls her out on it. She's like, "So your supplies are a crowbar?"
Yep. And he calls her out, and she basically knows what she's up to, and then tries to give Rick a heads up. Rick tries to give Alexandria a heads up, but of course his relay doesn't go through because it's an Oceansider who takes in his call.
Name, I forget her name.
Me too, but. And then we all know it's going to happen. I mean, again, this just sounds like deja vu a bit, but Daryl very kindly offers to give Rick a ride on his bike and then goes like the wrong way. And once again, Rick and Daryl end up in a little tussling match. This is like, how many times do these guys got to do this stuff? And there's a few things about this thing. So they end up like kind of wrestling and end up in this big hole for like where this hole came from. I don't know. But
like the Sarlacc pit of The Walking Dead.
But first of all, wouldn't this hole be full of walkers? I mean, it's just kind of there. Maybe I don't know. It just seems a little weird. And even while they're in there, walkers start to come in and like fall in, and they have to like kill them and everything. And it's much like they're talking out what their grievances are, and. Daryl basically says to Rick, like, look, we've all been out there. We all support you. I mean, not that we support you, but we don't agree with this thing that you've done. And you got to let Maggie go and do this. And it always seems like Daryl, and this is always Daryl's thing, is like, it was so much better when it was just the original team,
Which is, you can't go back. I mean, I guess you can. You can be like, all right, our 5 guys... Oh, and I guess a couple more children, we have to get back out on the road. Like, it's an unrealistic thing.
Right. And I mean, Rick, Daryl like pulls out the Carl card and is like, you can't do this thing that Carl wanted isn't real and you can't do it. And the thing is that, okay, whether Carl wanted it or not, Rick is not incorrect in that you need to figure out ways to cooperate. And there's some things that you're not going to like when you have like these big communities of people that you're trying to keep alive. And Rick's thing is like, why make more walkers? The dead are already kind of taking over. It doesn't help us to make more walkers and to basically keep exacting vengeance, because then you're just back to the Negan way of life. So that is an interesting exchange between them. And always, it's like, they always find their loyalty to each other at the end, usually because the walkers are threatening them, and this is no exception.
Well, and even mid-fight, Daryl's like, I would die for you. Like,
Right.
these are guys, it's such a weird thing. Like,
Yeah.
people who have that sentiment towards each other typically, I think, don't get into fistfights.
Right. And I mean, like, Rick does point out, and he's, again, not incorrect, that Daryl believed in him, even though he's the one who left his brother up on that roof. So he's basically like, I know you're capable of making decisions that are the hard decisions and you're not always totally happy about, but you did support me, and this is why we're here where we are. I did enjoy their little pulling out of the pit, even though it felt very Star Wars to me, their whole fight sequence. So there was that, them rolling around the mud again.
But it takes them a while. It definitely takes them a while to
really
get out of
long
there.
time,
And things get way worse when a gunfight breaks out at the
Yep.
camp, basically, because so they had sent Austin, the nice savior, to go and talk the saviors back into coming back to the camp.
Yeah.
That something happens off screen, which is Jed and all the other saviors who are mean beat up Austin and take his gun and come back to camp
And threaten Carol.
ready to take it over, I guess, for resources, because they're like, well, sure, there's nothing. It's Sanctuary. What's the point of going back there? I assume is like they're having some second thoughts. So they kind of go straight back to gangster style, which is unfortunate and yet not completely unpredictable. But a huge fight breaks out, and I think it's an Oceansider riding the white horse. It's a woman, anyway.
Yep.
Maybe she's from any of the other communities. But White Horse runs away into the forest, and White Horse comes back in a bad way later.
Yep.
Big old fight happening, and that's going to draw the herds, and which is what also brings more zombies into the pit with Daryl and Rick, which is bad mojo. Mm-hmm. And we've also got a lot of conversations between Michonne and Negan is being extremely manipulative as usual, and he kind of has been in every scene we've had with him, with Gabriel, with Rick. So far this season, right? He's still very much old Negan. He's like, you're just getting this place ready for me. It's all going to fall apart. I'm going to take it over. And he's trying to get inside Michonne's head when he's talking about her son and weakness and strength. And it's all bad news. But Michonne, she kind of does fall for it at one point where she gets really mad, but then she comes back later and turns the tables on him. And by the end, Negan's like a mewling, pathetic version of his former self.
Because all he wants is Lucille. And there's definitely a lot of references to her in this episode. Like Michonne, while she's out doing her zombie killing thing, at one point loses her samurai sword, her katana. And
there's also a baseball
and there's a baseball
children's
bat,
book,
and then the baseball children's book, and she gets all. So we know that she's thinking about him, and really that's he's trying to do his worst, and ultimately she does turn the tables on him and is just like, oh, you're just so pathetic. And, so there is that. We have not seen Maggie make her appearance to get him yet in this episode.
Which is funny because Rick got there in like one cut last episode, and it's taking Maggie like an entire episode.
And then we've also got the whole exchange between Anne and Gabriel. She ultimately, instead of doing something with the zombie, she decides to abandon him and leaves him a note that makes him cry. And, so it's basically all mess at this point. And when Rick gets out of the hole with Daryl, they discover that a herd is coming their way. Rick jumps on the white horse that has mysteriously appeared and basically tells Daryl he'll lead the herd away. Daryl's idea is to have the herd go right through onto the bridge and be taken by the water, which also seems kind of like a bad idea because you would be leading it right into the camp with all the people, which they don't know has been kind of scattered. So that seems kind of weird to me. But, Rick decides to take them instead somewhere else, and then another herd merges up with them, and the horse, like, it just seems, again, it's like sort of a cliffhanger at the end here. He gets thrown. This is
Cliffhanger.
not, this is not a position anybody would want to be in, but he basically gets knocked out with a rebar through him.
Yeah, like impaled on a piece of concrete, screams, and then passes out. And then there's a cool shot, pans up. You look down at these two herds converging on his position. I'd say they're, 50 feet away?
Yeah.
And he just passed out.
Yep.
To me, like, this is death sentence right here. And so,
Yep.
cue memories of Morgan's final scene in Fear the Walking Dead.
Yep. And look, there's been some, like, we knew that something was going to happen. I mean, they never show Rick Grimes happy for long, and there's been a lot of, like, sort of domestic bliss with Michonne in both of these episodes. With Judith, we saw a lot of those montages of Rick running around with her and running around Michonne and basically planning to start a family with Michonne. But yet this underlying conflict has been brewing the entire time. And we know that ultimately Rick Grimes can't be happy. He still misses Carl. Like, he's only one person, and it's interesting to me, though, because it's sort of like he had to have enough people buy into the Rick Grimes way in order to get to where they are at this point. And I feel like even though they are struggling, I do feel like there would be more people in support of this. But, I guess it wouldn't be the conflict of the show if you didn't have this. And have these things.
It's only a few people who are not supporting him.
Right,
and they
but
feel
they
feel like he deceived them somehow
Right.
at the end of the fight with Negan, when it was man on man, right? It was single combat basically, and they feel like he deceived them by taking some choice out of their hands.
Right. And
And
then
so
he
that-
made the
that
decision without it
justifies-
being the community, I guess. But
And that justifies their actions now, which is complete deception on the part of, her name's Rachel, the Alexandria Relay 1,
Yep.
who's apparently in on it. All the other Oceansiders who are in on it.
Yep.
And Daryl driving him away from Alexandria and into a pit, as it turns out. And Maggie basically being this assassin or executioner heading to Alexandria. There's deception and deception and deception in this episode, and that's what I think it feels. It's not just I don't understand how they can possibly feel this betrayed by Rick.
right,
To,
that's the hard
to subject
stretch.
him to this amount of betrayal. Like, there's a lot of betrayal going on here.
Yeah, there's this seems like a big stretch to me. I mean, look, I do think that it, as we were saying, especially with like the last two episodes and some of the things in talking about Constitution, look, it is hard to create civilization. It's hard to create agreement when there's dissension, and to do it in a way where at least the majority of people can support whatever course of action your communities are taking. And so I like the idea of these things being played out and how hard it is to create a consensus. But I also think that I don't know that things would have fallen apart this quickly, because I think you're right. Like, because it kind of feels like if the people that know Rick the most and are the most loyal, or like, Daryl would die for him. That is the ultimate sacrifice. And, Rick, despite what Daryl has done, is still going to rescue him from that pit. It feels like it all would have fallen apart a lot more quickly if this is how this stuff is playing out now. But again, it's a show, and they've got to kind of get to some kind of crisis point to get a resolution, I guess.
And you know what? What we should be grateful for is the last 3 seasons with all the Savior stuff. It was all build up and build up and build
True.
up and no payoff, right? And now, like I was saying, warning signs. This is the 3rd episode. That had, like, I'm gonna count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like 11 different events happen in
Right.
that episode between the cold open, the Saviors on the road with Maggie, the confrontation at the camp, the cabin fight. Like, one after another, there was just bam, 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 bam.
Right.
And I've got to say, this is Angela Kang taking a new tack on this show. And when I said at the beginning, when we started talking about this, it feels like we're coming up to a mid-season finale. It's episode 4.
Right.
this show basically kind of throws out that model of, all right, we're just going to do build up for like 8 episodes in a row, and then there'll be a tiny payoff at the mid-season finale, and then we'll do another 8 episodes of build up to another payoff at the end.
Right.
Like that's an exhausting way to run a show, and I feel like this has been really refreshing. The fact that we kind of, I know we're also saying, wow, this is really going fast, and it's kind of weird that so many people are anti Rick at this point. But it's also a way better and more interesting and more engaging show.
Well, and I mean, the other way to look at it is that these things have been brewing, and then there's a confluence of events that then make the crisis points happen, and that's true.
And time jumps allow you to do that, right?
Right.
Which we've had an 18-month time jump, so.
So they're jumping past all the sort of boring parts of crops being grown and that kind of thing, and when things are great, and they're bringing it to a crisis point because things aren't quite going as well. And we do get some of a sense of why. I don't remember the name of the woman, but the woman that comes to report to Michonne about what's happening in the Alexandria community basically says the crows have taken like a huge number of like the tomatoes, and they're worried about the amount that's going to be there to feed people. And Michonne's sort of reaction is like, well, we're going to have to get the mill going because that will help, and if you think about all of these things, look, growing food for massive amounts of people is very hard. Mm-hmm. It's a debate that happens here now in our world where people like get very upset about GMO altered food because they're like, oh, well, it all should be organic. But the truth is that without some of the alterations that they've done, we wouldn't be able to feed the masses of people that are currently on our planet. Yeah. So that's like, and it's like a weird thing because it's like, of course, everybody would like to eat in a way that isn't, with all these pesticides and things like that. But all of these things stave off, you wouldn't be able to keep this stream going. And so you're talking about a community that is trying to grow crops from scratch. They definitely don't have pesticides from what it seems like. And, they don't have pest control. And all of these things are things that you have to learn. And, the basic sort of like things for survival, food, shelter, water, all of these things are priorities and take a lot of energy to keep in place.
So on top of that, when you've got people being dicks to each other, then
right.
It's just,
it can be. And then when you have a scarcity of food, the tensions are going to be there, and especially if one community has and one does not. And so I do think these are really interesting things to be debating and talking about and watching playing out. So I'm really enjoying rewatching this season, and it was such a massive improvement on the last one. So so it's been fun, and I'm looking forward to the rest of it.
Yeah. Next time we're gonna get together and talk about episodes 5 and 6, which does not still take us up to the actual mid-season finale, but there is a huge event coming up in this part of the show. So it's very cool to not to grind that point to a fine dust. So episodes 5 and 6 are What Comes After and Who Are You Now? And we will talk about those next time. And are we doing that next week, AJ?
Yes. Yes, that should be fine.
Wunderbar, as they might say. Okay, so thank you for listening. And you can get with us on Twitter at ReanimatedPcast, reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com, and our show notes are on reanimatedpodcast.com if you want to check out some horrifying links to a horrifying potential plague coming out of China in the pneumonic form.
Literally the plague. Ooh.
Literally the plague. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Ciao.